Welcome to another episode of the Talent Transformation Podcast. Today we have Mark Stelzner. He is the founder and managing principal of IA, an HR transformation consultancy, and a recognized thought leader in the HR technology and transformation space. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Mark, can you just tell me a little bit about IA?
Yeah, we really do three things. So one is we help the C-suite of primarily large global 1,000 organizations. Average client is 75,000 employees in 70 plus countries. The C-suite is struggling with prioritization, resourcing, their operating model. Basically, what do we do in what order with what dependencies, and how do we secure the capital, the operating expense, the opportunity cost to pursue key care abouts? So one distinction in that category is every business case we have ever written has been approved.
Oh,
really good storytellers.
Okay, that's a good track record.
The second thing is once you have your eyes on the prize, how do you deconstruct this amazing provider landscape, yourselves included, to find the best fit provider who's going to be an accelerant to achieving those objectives? So we run a lot of RFPs. We do workshops in the middle of the RFP process. We think this walled procurement-led process is not what's going to lead to long-term sustainable relationships. So we run RFPs.
Yeah.
And then in the last probably 8 or 9 years, we really leaned into process optimization, where people own a lot of great tools and technologies. They have really, really smart resources, but there's disharmony in their ways of working. So we do very forensic deconstruction of current state processing, reconstruction of future state processes, and then priorities related to projects, programs, initiatives, remediation. How do we improve with intent in the areas where we think we want to win? So that's all we do. We're a fiercely independent firm, and we've been around for about 19 years.
Well, that sounds like a lot.
It's plenty.
Okay.
Okay.
So I don't know where to start on that. Let's think about that for a minute. You're going into companies that are pretty anxious to do digital transformation.
Certainly.
Okay. It's probably true that they've already launched some kind of digital transformation when you meet them, right? Because I don't think we have a customer, for example, that wouldn't say that they are a few years into a digital transformation. But I think that there still seem to be sort of caught with a lot of systems of questionable value.
Sure.
And they're also still struggling to sort of understand how that transformation or what that transformation is supposed to look like. I think, do you find that you go in and they tell you not only are they in the middle of a transformation, but that they can't actually describe what their end state is?
I think they have a strong hypothesis, and I think that hypothesis is often shaped by management consulting firms, lived experience and socialization among their peer group.
Right.
So there is a sense of HR needs to be leaner. HR needs to be more technically competent. HR needs to provide digital assets. I want to come back to this notion of a digital transformation.
Yes.
I question whether organizations are truly purpose-built for full digital transformation, but I'd love to come back to that. So they have a point of view. But I think of it truly as a hypothesis. We think we have a destination in mind, but it presumes that who we are today is who we're actually going to be in that projected future.
Right.
And if we know anything, it's that organizations are fluid and dynamic, and we can't really predict what the future state may be. So part of the trick here is to try to project ourselves into some scenarios that represent our future state.
Right.
And then determine based on those scenarios, we're really professional scenario planners if you think about it.
Work backwards.
What's the best and highest use of teams and resources in order to achieve that? And the reality is there's endless permutations, which cause paralysis. So really it's about what are the areas in which differentiation is going to cause you to win, to elevate your function, to differentiate yourself from your competitors. That's the hardest work, to be honest with you, right up front, is getting that level of alignment that sometimes may be disassociated with the original hypothesis.
Right. And that is something that I talk about a lot when I say, you have to find that sustainable competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
And, the challenge for some of my customers is that the landscape in which that they have to affect change is so vast, and they have a lot of technical debt. We call it technical debt in technology. Software that has to keep running, but is not fit for purpose anymore.
That's right.
Okay. And then a lot of built-in workarounds. And at the same time, the customers are struggling with what is really available on the market.
That's right.
Okay. So, it's very hard to cut through the hype that comes out of the software industry. Okay. And at the same time, they also have some entrenched power centers inside the organization that make change rather difficult. So are you mostly, and the only time you get free of that is when you're really up at, the CEO level of the organization, right? Because they can kind of look past all of those things. But everybody below that kind of gets stuck in a lot of that. Do you mostly work with the CEO, or do you mostly work with the CHRO? Or
our primary entry point is through the CFO, CPO, CTO. Certainly the CEO is part of the work we do because they have to be. It's inextricably linked to the destination of the organization. Right. But I'd say sometimes that elevation does a disservice to the reality that the organization itself is facing. Meaning you can set an artificial destination that by Q3 of 2025, we would like to achieve the following. But without understanding the projects, programs, and initiatives that are subsuming your teams, the actual skills and capabilities of those same teams, so capability versus capacity, the understanding of the means by which one can achieve that future state, and the nascent and maybe even hidden capabilities within the investments you've already made. We're talking about 3D chess in some respects, where you're trying, all these pieces are moving around the board at exactly the same time, but sometimes it's really unclear who's winning.
Do you ever just talk about finding the entrepreneurial energy inside the organization?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Several years ago, and I won't name the firm, we were working with a very, very large brand. They had spent about $95 million on a transformation, a people transformation. They had worked with a formidable and certainly renowned management consultancy, and they were stuck. And the head of transformation asked me to come in and meet with the leadership team and the board. New CEO sat down at the table, very large table. CFO is on her phone. Board members are checking email.
The usual stuff.
Yeah, no one's very present. You've probably been in a few of those meetings. But what really got the team's attention is when I asked the new CEO to define his true north. What is your true north? What is the one thing that when you get lost navigating through the complexities of your job, the imperfect information that you're working with, et cetera, that you believe is the true north for you? And then what is that for the organization, and how those two match or not match? Is there dissonance potentially between them? It stopped the room in a really interesting way. Devices down, eyes up. And this was his chance, really, as a new CEO, maybe 6 weeks in seat, to define something that he inherited. But what was clear is he had yet to declare what his true north and what the organization's true north were. And when he did, we now knew what we were moving toward. And we now knew how to cascade that down the organization. We now knew whether it was aspirational, inspirational, factual. We could then measure progress and restructure the entire program, which is what we did. And within 6 months, we fired ourselves. And what's really strange about, and what I'll tell you about us, is we want to get out of the way. Our job is to get you started, is to teach you methods, is to give you a reflective surface, and I'm serious about this, that you cannot look away from. This is your truth, or this is the version of your truth that you're currently projecting. Is that in fact the identity you want? And if it's not, then it's beholden upon all of us to change that destination. And I think sometimes what we find is at that elevation in the organization, there is very little truth-telling.
Yeah. In fact, I would say that, well, when I think about the entrepreneurial spirit, I find that, quite a few of our customers are exhibiting that trait, but they're inside an organization that's not responding to it. And, I think about a large organization always from the context of my own environment. Okay. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and the companies I've created, are smaller companies, obviously. But I've been around other, startups and entrepreneurial companies, and you can't mandate that behavior, and you can't. You have to. The best thing about, let's say, a startup, okay, is there's gonna be a lot of change,
Right.
okay, and the people that are driving the change are sworn to change. They're free to change,
Right.
okay, and they're enthusiastic about that freedom, and they have a lot of energy, okay. And one of the problems I see in the digital transformation is, the CEO doesn't do it, right? He's not doing the transformation. He's gonna pass down to all the people what he wants them to do. Okay. But if you have people in the organization that are really eager to change, I see the process as sort of like, how do I get out of the way and let those people do it? I'm throwing out just a sort of a non-top-down approach.
Right.
Okay. Do you think that's possible?
Certainly. And I find, particularly in the people function, the sad reality is there are huge swaths of what HR does for a living that aren't entrepreneurial. They are absolutely table stakes requirements. And when you put an entrepreneurially minded individual into an operational function, and I'm not saying all of HR is like this, but a lot of HR is, they lose that spirit. They lose that sense of experimentation. They lose that desire to potentially do sprints and fail fast and bring new ideas forward, because you're frankly you're burdened. It's heavy. So how do you rise from that when you're wearing 5 or 6 hats and more hats are coming because HR is getting smaller and smaller and smaller? And that's and I mean this truly, what's heartbreaking about the people function is HR can't catch a break. And it's not getting
I'll
easier.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. They can't catch a break. I feel like there's quite a fair amount of entrepreneurial energy inside of HR.
Certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that they have a challenge with the C-suite. Okay. In terms of being able to actually take the actions that they want to execute on. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
Talking to lots of people that are running large HR organizations.
Sure.
And I notice it in one area, which is technology, because I actually know a lot about technology. I kind of know a lot about technology, and I see them struggling with the IT organization. Do you ever? You said you came in to the companies through the CFO, through the CTO. Do you come in through the CHRO?
Oh, yeah, quite
you
often.
do. Okay,
Yeah,
and you
I'd say
help them.
predominantly.
Okay, so you're helping them. How do you help them relate to the CEO and the CFO and the CTO to get what they want to get done?
Yeah, we have this philosophy that says our job is to stand next to you. In a perfect world, I'll stand behind you, but I should never be standing in front of you. Everything is storytelling.
Yeah.
I mean, you've navigated a lot of boardrooms. You've been in a lot of C-suite meetings. It's storytelling, backed up by facts and data, but also with energy and purpose and a sense of something, right? We're all here to accomplish something. And I find, if unlocked and unleashed, the storytelling capability of the HR and people function is unparalleled. We have nothing but stories. And we have stories, by the way, that every human can relate to. I don't care where you are in the stack of the organization. We have all been recruited. We have all been onboarded. We've all tried to leverage our benefits programs. We've all want to get paid. We all want opportunities to lead and to grow and to develop. Like, we've all been there. It's intrinsically human. Part of the challenge, I think, and the rub that I think you're getting at is there's a sense that when it comes to technology or digitization, that suddenly CPOs, CHROs need to wake up and be technological experts. And many are, by the way, just to name it. You don't need to be, actually. What you need to understand is the outcomes that technology can enable for your people. You need to think about use cases. And this is where tech for tech's sake, is leading, frankly, to the tech debt that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
And the
source
reason
of it.
absolutely. And the only reason I take a little bit of a pause with digital transformation is because, let's face it, huge percentages of the populations of these large, amazing, storied global organizations have no access to technology other than for the cause of the job that they're to do. If you work in a distribution center, or you're working in a clean room at a pharma company, or you work in a manufacturing facility, you have technology, but that technology is fit for purpose for your role. But you are often precluded from bringing your own device. Wage and hour concerns, security concerns, frankly, licensing costs, where we can't even provision email addresses or digital environments, despite technological capability to do so. There's a perception that we're not going to digitally enable a huge percentage of our frontline. And what's a bit counterintuitive is leveraging the good graces of solutions like yours that are all about digital engagement. And I'm sure you have endless sources of data and research and actual behavioral heuristics that say the world is more digitally enabled than sometimes we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. I mean, I think, what we try to do with our solution is empower the HR organization to be a bigger digital player inside the organization.
Sure.
What I'm going back to with you, and I keep doubling back to this, is you're advising the C-suite.
Yes.
Okay. What is it you're telling the C-suite about HR and what they need to do? Because, hold on a minute, because my observation, okay, and I'll admit that the HR organization needs to be more confident about their digital capabilities.
Sure.
Okay. But I also feel like they have been under-supported, okay, by the IT organization, okay, and dealing with their debt, which they have a huge amount of.
Sure.
Okay. And the CFO is a little transactional, okay, and HR, remember, is trying to get out of transactional, okay, and get into the spiritual, the cultural, okay, and the softer things that really do drive productivity, okay. So how do you help a CHRO with a message that is not about we're going to make a tweak to the benefits system?
I was talking to a CTO just 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about this exact topic.
Right.
And I said, is this even interesting to you and your organization?
Well, that's a good question for a CTO.
Is this even good? Because you've got e-commerce and omni-channel. Like you've got a million really cool, super interesting things to work on. And his honest answer is no, not really.
Right.
And I said, okay, if you could let it go, if you trusted that the people function could care for it themselves.
Now we're getting to the big issue.
Right? And you felt it as if, certainly when it comes to security, privacy, integrations, architecture, data, right? There's some level of oversight and standards. Exactly.
Right.
How would you feel about that? And his answer is, can we start tomorrow? So
that's an uncommon answer.
But not from a CTO necessarily. Some CTOs want
I would argue that's an uncommon answer. I would argue that of the hundreds of high-level HR people that I talk to, they would be very surprised if they got that answer out of their CTO.
Because tech wants control.
Exactly. Let's call it what it is.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. But what I'm finding is, again, back to this capacity capability debate on that spectrum, that IT does not want to put discretionary capacity into areas that are not forward looking to the organization, that are not certainly revenue generating, and those that support the enterprise functions, which are critical, right? This is critical infrastructure that's necessary. They aren't looked to necessarily as the next generation of technical thought leadership. And so if we can seed more capacity to allow, just like I'm talking about in HR, there's really smart, highly minded people in tech and HR that would love to elevate out of the whack-a-mole hole if they could.
Yeah.
But we've gotten ourselves in the self-fulfilling prophecy where this endless discussion of sort of tech versus HR. And I share all of that just to say that triad of the CFO, the CTO, the CPO/CHRO, I am finding closer and closer linkages. And I'm not a generationalist. You know, I'm a Gen Xer, but as I'm watching those that frankly COVID ruined their career, they don't have the energy, it took a personal toll on them. As they move out of the people function, the next generation that's moving in, I think senses that the only way for us to achieve balance is for the three parties to govern collectively. And when I talk about collective governance, I mean it. It's not about this is mine, this is yours, this is yours.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
It's the intersection between. And I would challenge anyone that says, no, I own, you're not going to thrive in the current environment. So these are the real sit-down conversations that we like to build, which is bridges between these functions. You can't go it alone. I don't expect HR to be the best technical function. That's what a technology organization is for. But I expect you to have a point of view about capability that you'd like to unlock relative to the future.
I think that in the organizations that we work with that are having the most success, they have made a special partnership between HR and technology.
Certainly.
And they've usually relabeled it and redefined it. Because the things that HR needs to do in dealing with people and the technology that you need to deploy to deal with people is a little harder to get your hands around than installing a new finance system.
Without question.
It's a little harder than some other things, and it's also something that can have trouble competing with a revenue generating, because companies do have to think short term a lot of the time. And if you go into a general IT organization with your idea about how to develop a better culture and how to use technology to do it, you have to compete against the project that IT's taken on to send more marketing messages to potential buyers. Well, it's pretty clear, that if you're in that battle, you have a good chance of losing out if you're on the HR side. I think though that a lot of people in HR are actually drowning in a sea of technology that they didn't choose.
Sure, that could be true as well.
And that's making it harder for them to navigate to a transformation that actually gets them to strategically have the type of HR organization that they want to have. I'm not saying some of our clients aren't achieving that, because some are, but we don't really have to talk about them because they are achieving it. So let's look at the ones that are not achieving it.
Exactly.
And if you're not achieving it and you don't have the insight and the vision and the energy inside the HR organization to do that, you probably have to try to generate that from the top down. But what I'm saying is there are companies that have that kind of energy inside the HR organization, and it's trapped.
Without question, HR has been hamstrung relative to investments and resources. And I want to come back to product-led as an example in just a moment, if I may. But as soon as we get back to HR's comfort zone, if I can position it as such, where we're back to focusing on the employee, on the family, on the candidates, on the alumni, on the people leader, on the organizational
Which
leader.
is what HR likes to focus on.
And I would argue it's kind of what we should be focused on, because if we're not here for our customer, what are we here for? So we need to get out of our own sort of ecosystem and get back into the business of caring deeply. And I'm not suggesting HR doesn't, but we're distracted, caring deeply about our customer. And what'll be interesting, and why design thinking and journey mapping and those things I think are really interesting developmental skills, not to mention prompt engineering and other things I'd love to see HR develop, is the technological aspects in some respects get subsumed or commoditized within those stories. It's not to say the technology isn't important, it's the engine. It's to say that HR could actually potentially return to its position of strength for those that are struggling with that position by virtue of re-emphasizing, in some cases, why we got in HR in the first place.
Absolutely.
And I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch, because we've been wrestling with this notion of how does HR partner with tech? How do we make HR more technically conversant? We're seeing digital teams show up.
Digital teams now, we have the HR organization understanding, certainly the customers we work with, understanding that It's not about buying different technology to do various tasks. It's about being a designer of a product that allows you to deliver an experience.
Right.
Okay. And to meet a business objective through the delivery of the experience. And this type of design thinking has not been, I admit, an area of expertise historically for the HR organization. But I also want to point out that that's also true of the IT organization. So when HR says, I need to think product design, they need to create a new kind of partnership with IT. Okay, that is not, we are the IT department, we will do your technology for you, you will be a user, we will help you buy 6 products for your business off the shelf, and you will use them, to we will find the right people in our organization and the right people in your organization that will come together and think in this entrepreneurial product design perspective about how to create something that delivers an HR experience that reflects the true value that the HR organization can deliver to the organization, which is a very, very high value, right?
Because can I ask you, when you say product, are you thinking?
I don't mean a single product.
You mean a capability,
a technology capability, a technology stack that looks like a product,
right?
Because HR works with people, and people don't like being in different systems. They like experiencing something. And if the technology stack is really good, it actually becomes invisible to the users. And I recognize when somebody is able to create product and when they're not. And I admit that many of our customers are not very experienced in that. But I'd also argue that the organizations have no choice but to let them do it. No choice, because their digital transformations aren't going to work if they don't end up with product. And if the people designing the product are not the people that understand what the end state is, you will not get a product that's useful. You can only create the right product if the HR people are part of the architecture team for that product. So you have to upskill them, okay, and provide them with the technology that allows them to start thinking that way. And remember that they evolve and they change because they're not a static organization. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, especially in some of these podcasts, is that the people that are coming into HR today are not the people that ran HR 25 years ago.
But let me ask you a question. Are you bullish on HR, or are you a little cynical on HR?
I'm bullish on HR.
You are? Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm very bullish on our technology, which I think is going to be game-changing for HR. But I'm also bullish because I see the composition of people that have come into HR over the last 15 years, and many of them are technically savvy. Many of them have experiences outside of HR that are really, they've been either were an entrepreneur or they ran a business for the organization. And I think that's partly also because the C-suite does recognize the value of HR, and they're beginning to move people into HR from other areas. I have customers that they ran some of the largest parts of the company, and they've moved over into HR because the company is struggling with generational change, with the commitment of workers to the mission of the company. And you know, if you have 100,000 people that are only partially committed to your existence, you're pretty much on your way out of existence, right? So I think that we've moved away from the HR as a back office function, but I still think that HR is fighting an uphill battle right now.
Relative to?
I think they need to be able to execute a little more freely. Okay.
Faster and more freely?
Well, I think freely allows you to determine when fast, when not so fast, because I think faster sort of implies, I think, that you know what you're going to do and you're just going to get it done faster. I think more freely means, you have an opportunity to sort of, take control over the transformation. I think if you polled, well, I don't know if you've done this, but
so you're thinking about the trappings of the other parts of the organization that are limiting that freedom. That's part of what you're seeing.
Well, remember, I also come from the entrepreneurial, smaller company environment where we tend to not have those things. So but I do spend a fair amount of time. Now we have artificial intelligence coming along, and so we're putting a lot of complex but powerful technology, in the hands of HR, which is good, the organization is eager to use artificial intelligence, so that's great. Okay. HR doesn't have the time. HR leaders don't have the time to become experts in artificial intelligence. Okay. But they do need to sell it into the organization in the way they want to do it. Okay. And that's a pretty big challenge. And it's a fact, they're going to run into some challenges in getting these types of things implemented inside of a large organization. And they're going to have to make a very good case for the things they do to the C-suite. There's a certain amount of trust that the C-suite needs to have in the HR organization to let them get the momentum. Okay.
And you feel like
change.
you feel like that trust is low
I think they're still struggling with that. Absolutely. I think so. I mean, just from taking the polls and just from listening to the CHROs that I talk to, I think they're still struggling with that. And we still have organizations that are locked into, for example, very traditional ERP vendors that are trying to provide all of the technology for the organization.
Yep.
Okay. And we have organizations that, by the way, have dropped $50 million or $100 million to be on that technology. Okay. So if you're someone that comes in and says, it doesn't do what I want it to do, okay, and it never will, you have to make a case for something else.
Right.
And HR, that's a big lift.
Now,
HR.
Would you say that's a TA limitation? And the only reason I'm scratching at this a little bit further is because of the fact that you're right, where the decision authority sits. And by the way, we're finding decision authority is moving up, not because I don't have authority, but because of de-risking.
Yeah.
What a VP could decide and purchase independently has moved to the EVP. What the EVP goes to the C-suite. What the C-suite has the authority to do is even going to the board with more frequency.
Which is the opposite of agility, by the way.
Certainly, right? And
yes.
And I think there's capital is scarce. You can only place a couple bets every year. We want to make sure we're placing the right bets. So I imagine your deal length is taking longer. Decisions are harder to come by. But I will say those those end-to-end capabilities that you're describing, there is trade-off analysis. But TA recruiting needs to be in the room to have a strong voice, and then also to substantiate how a bespoke and separate solution can bring different value. And I'm advocating, by the way, this is me cheering for TA to be part of that conversation.
Talent management, which has an even bigger problem.
Certainly. And I would say TA and talent are now conflating into end-to-end talent. We're finding
it's all
TA is
talent.
collapsing
Right.
under talent.
And you mentioned earlier about users and commitment to using systems, and talent management has a huge crisis in non-engagement with the systems that they put in front of the end users.
But the failure to differentiate and choosing someone that has lesser feature sets or capabilities is a failure of storytelling, in my opinion. Only in the sense of, tell me how the delta between, let's say, Avature and the end-to-end ERP HCM solution is so materially different, and how choosing one over the other is going to bring us lift and value, and to what populations, for what outcomes, and in what differentiated areas. And give me some examples of that. And this is sort of how do you all, your sales organizations and delivery organizations, help to lift them up, provided, by the way, that they're even invited into the room.
Well,
and that's a dependency,
well,
right?
This is why I have you in the seat here now.
Sure.
And I'm saying, okay, so you're somebody that advises the C-suite.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So there's two things going on there when you're advising in the C-suite. Either A, you're working with the HR organization to help them understand how to better impact the C-suite,
right? Okay,
and get the ideas that they have to get the respect that they need in the C-suite. Because I understand, and I've been in board meetings. There are savage events. Let's be, you know what I mean? There's
it's about as animalistic as you can.
Yeah, this is a no prisoner environment. This takes away all the nicety and formalities of business go away when you get into the boards.
And for those listening who haven't been in that, it's shocking and a little disheartening.
Yes. They think, everybody's gonna be really behaved,
very logical. Read the pre-reads.
No, it's the jungle up there. Absolutely right. Okay, and I think sometimes HR leadership that's not at the board level goes into that and get surprised by that environment.
Well, can I give you just one quick story in the interest of time as well? So we worked with a large German-based athletic organization who we were brought in when a new CHRO arrived. When we arrived on the scene, all projects, programs, and initiatives globally for HR were inventoried. There were 867 of them. No one can get anything done with 867. Exactly. So what we had to do is a very relentless prioritization exercise. But what came from it is determining what capabilities we believe we need to play and what capabilities we believe we need to win. And that's the exact language that was applied, by the way. That culled that down to the point then when we get to the determination of tooling and capability and digitization, that if the category was one where it wasn't a differentiated capability, we're good enough, dare I say good enough was good enough.
Good enough's good enough.
Then you would accept delivered capability, very little configuration, most likely out of the box. Try to come with global standards. Where you really wanted to shine, then we get into really cool, unique, bespoke capabilities. But I bring that up to say that's the conversation. Like that's the richness of getting the stakeholders in the room. But what it requires is to actually inventory all the stuff that we're doing that we may be wasting our time on, that if we didn't have a means of collecting the hundreds of millions of dollars that we're spending in certain categories, we wouldn't even know how to separate the wheat from the chaff.
That's absolutely true. And there's no doubt that the HR organization needs to come into the board level with a very, very short, concise, super value add, competitive differentiator.
That's right.
List of things that they need to do. Okay.
And I would say also that it's tethered one-to-one to exactly what the business objectives are. Like
absolutely.
If I have a slide,
if you can't tie it to that,
if I can't tie it to it, unless it's statutory or regulatory, I'm gonna stop it. But that's a little bit of the art and the science, honestly, that I think we don't have a lot of muscle because we haven't done it a lot in the people function. We don't get a lot of opportunity to fundamentally reshape the people function or the organization or the technologies. Your clients only get one bite at the apple, as it were, to go after how you reshape the talent function. And it's probably not going to come around again for maybe 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think fortunately, one thing that COVID did was it did make a lot of, executive and board level people realize that the HR organization needed to be very agile, and that they needed to think differently about the strategic role of HR because suddenly their workforce was not in the office. There was a lot of things that they hadn't thought about that they suddenly needed to really deal with and get right. We could debate on this for a long time.
No, so it's a great discussion. I'm enjoying it. Thank you.
I think I think it's interesting. I think we live in interesting times, and I think that the artificial intelligence that I was talking about earlier in this event is going to just put hyper focus on some of the issues we're talking about. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. So it'll be interesting to see how you deal with that. It's always great having you in to chat. Love to talk to you more in the future and find out what you're finding out.
Love the conversation. Thank you so much for the time. I really enjoyed it.
No, great having you here.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks.